do one more. This one is on strategic leadership. What is strategy? Let me give you a real simple explanation. I'm going to give you a more formal definition here in just a little bit. But what do we mean by strategic leadership? What is strategy? Strategy is doing something over and over again that creates success. And it's intentional, not accidental. We've already talked about one company today and their symbols, but this company basically does the same thing over and over and over again, occasionally giving us a new item here and there, and occasionally letting us roll the rim. But outside of that, day in and day out, they serve a lot of coffee. So what makes an organization successful is often finding the repeatable activity that produces results. The problem with strategy is that most organizations can't seem to, they make plans, but plans are not strategy. Plans that are not executed are not strategy. The other thing that companies tend to do, churches are not far behind, but churches tend not to do much of this well at all. But if you're a nonprofit, you're going to be asked for a strategic plan. The problem that we often find is that a strategic plan is created and then it goes into a box and then it's not pulled out again for 5 years. And so what we need for our organizations to be nimble, by the way, we live in a time in which organizations need to be responsive and nimble. They've got to, opportunities come and go, and if you don't take advantage of the opportunity, you'll miss it. And that's the world we live in because of the volatility of markets, the world leaders. Opportunities come. For example, if there's a group of people to feed, you may only need to feed them for a little bit, but after that, it's over. I don't know how long Pat will be helping with the Ukrainians, but right now it's a need because they're being forced to live somewhere else. And they're often immigrants because they're immigrants who didn't want to be immigrants at all. They weren't even trying. So. One of my go-to models for what makes a good strategy is simplicity and repeatability. And what I've got up here is a map out of Southwest Airline. You guys familiar with Southwest? It's an American airline. I think WestJet originally was designed to kind of be the lower fare carrier, but eventually it's kind of bought into the fold. But Southwest is a airlines in the United States that decided to serve the medium-sized city market. They thought that the larger cities were served well enough with the other airlines. And so they said, is there a way for us to grab some of the smaller cities that maybe 4 or 5 hours apart by car, where in fact in their thinking is, could we build an airline where it made more sense to fly there than to drive there? And so they ended up in places like, they weren't at DFW, Dallas-Fort Worth, they were at Love Field, which was a little tiny airport in North Dallas. And they don't go to O'Hare in Chicago, they go to Midway. And so they use some of the smaller airports. But Southwest's design was to create kind of a low budget model. So here's some of the things that they came up with. They needed to have only one plane, not one single plane, but one model. So they don't fly anything but, I believe it's a 737. That's all they fly. And when you fly just one plane, you only need parts for that one plane at the various airports. And you can repair every plane that comes through. It's actually brilliant when you think about it. And we're not going to charge for baggage. Or neither are we going to charge for seating. The way you get seated in a Southwest plane is you get assigned a group, and then when your group goes in, you can pick any available seat. Wouldn't that be paradise? I get an aisle seat every time. But they invented a model that was basically repeatable and that they could actually move into a market that nobody else was serving. And they've been not only have they been extremely successful over the years, they've often been the airline of choice for that year. They've won the awards related to that business. I don't understand that business, but I do get the model. This is why in congregational life, church life, I say, can we create a model that's pretty much that we can replicate everywhere else so that we can train people to do, again, I think there's going to be regional differences, but do we have to make every church so individual that we have to reinvent the wheel? For example, does every church need the capacity to be online? Well, yes, but do they all have to have a social media coordinator to do it? How can you afford all the things that you need when it comes to that? Well, anyway, Southwest model was basically these regional hubs, same plane, low fares, luggage is included, at least 2 bags. Sounds good, doesn't it? Sounds like, because you guys have you guys tried any of the low fare stuff, the Flare, the Lynx, and any of those? They basically nickel and dime you for every extra. So what you start off with is a low fare, but by the time you have to add baggage and if you need coffee, forget it. You might get water. So what made Southwest's strategy successful is that it was simple, at least in concept, and repeatable.
So how does it affect the other airlines?
You know what? I don't know. I think it cut into their market a little bit because you can use those smaller hubs to get to bigger places, but I think they truly found a market that was needed. So
So
I haven't actually studied that. So
it's just a specific market. The
yeah,
target is just for that specific
yeah,
audience. Right?
yeah. One of the concepts that I teach, you've heard this before, Bong, but one of the concepts I teach is blue ocean, red ocean. Let me give you that idea. Maybe you've heard this before, but if you are a new company coming into business and you want to enter a market that's already saturated, you're going to have a tough go of it. You'd better offer something really good. For example, ABC offers adult learning. We've been doing this thing for 25 years, and we've watched other people try to come on board. They can't seem to get on board. We've been doing it for 25 years. We've been serving an adult learner, not a typical college student, for years. And so the language that is developed is that if you're in a red ocean, it's the competition so fierce that everybody's eating each other, thus blood, red ocean. What you want to discover, and I think churches can do this too, is what is the blue ocean that you can serve that nobody else can serve? The blue ocean means there's no competition. So most of our churches can't compete at the mega church level. You guys are not a mega church, probably won't be next week, right? Okay? So you're a small church. Well, what can we do that is a particular need right now in our area that nobody else is touching? If a food bank's already feeding people well, join the food bank and help them. Don't start another competitive food bank. So when it comes to nonprofits, Sarah, if you're going to start a nonprofit, if somebody else is already doing it, you're going to have, unless you're bringing something unique to the table. And so competition here works just like competition does for-profit companies. And so one of the things that I take nonprofits through, including churches, is a look at our competition. Save that one, we'll come back. So if you're envisioning we're going to plant a church here, you want to ask the question, what is it that we're uniquely bringing that nobody else could bring that would make a difference here? Does that kind of make sense? So you're meeting a particular need. Obviously, you're meeting spiritual needs, but you're bringing something that nobody else has. very simply, if you move a Filipino church, try to plant a Filipino church in a white community, that probably won't work quite the way you thought. I served a church in Chicago who was transitioning from an old white core. In fact, they had about, who was it? You, me, and a couple of others. We made up the white folk. But the white folks were still in leadership there, but the church was African American, and the community had become African American. And so we had to hold a few hands, do a few funerals, and then we ourselves had to let go because we were not the right people to make the next move for the church. It wasn't about racism or anything like that. It was, what is a good fit for this church and this location? Those are kind of simple things where you say, that probably won't work. Now, I've also noticed that among North American, and I'm going to say white, North American white church planting, they've often gone for the upward mobile suburbs. That is, they've gone for people who kind of look like them. Middle class, upper middle class. What do you know about the gospel? Who's most attracted to the gospel, the rich or the poor? So let's plant churches where the rich are. You see, we've not thought this thing out. And so Mission Alive is a group that I'm associated with. They're interested in actually planting like 100 churches in North America in places that are kind of hard to get places. That is, folks wouldn't actually think of putting a church there because it's a tough place to be. My experience is, though, that the poor often have riches we don't even know of. And I'm not talking money. There's other things that are wealth than just money. But no, I hear that. But my point is that when you plant a church somewhere, there's got to be a connection with that local area for the reason for doing it. Otherwise, Anyway, in the Chicago, we helped with what was clearly transitioning in the community, and so it connected with that. And so we knew that by a year, we weren't the right people to lead that congregation or be part of the leadership team. We needed to let this church grow up and become what it could become. By the way, planting church is a bit like having babies. You don't really get to determine what they look like as they grow up. You guys think you're trying to produce here? Yeah, because it sounds like you've described a church that if you ask them who would miss you if you disappeared all of a sudden, nobody would miss you. Yeah, if you're doing something that makes a difference, folks will miss you when you're gone. Yeah.
Or maybe they are happy that you're gone.
I'll let them deal with Jesus. I'll let them deal with Jesus on that one. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So I look at it like the churches now in our modern world are
Yeah.
lost, as you said, disoriented, lost focus, or in the focus actually is for the propagation of the gospel. But we are now as a non-profit, we're dealing with helping people, charities,
Uh-huh.
helping the communities,
Uh-huh.
right? Which I think also is a good strategy to invoke also the word of God there. But the main, as we are commanded, is to go to all nations, right, and proclaim the good news, not just to reach the poor, right, but actually, to preach the gospel.
Yeah. You remind me of something. I have a former student named Joe who he would always spiritualize things, basically explain why we didn't really have to do it, because we were, after all, really trying to help people's souls, not their bodies, And so Mary Thomas used to say of him, "You're so heavenly minded, you're of no earthly use." We don't want to be so heavenly minded that we are of no earthly use. Yeah, Jesus's approach was incarnation. He became one of us. That's what we want our churches. Our churches should imitate Jesus. And so if Jesus' way of doing business is becoming part of, then we should find ways to become part of wherever we're called to serve. Yeah, I don't think there's an intentional target, but there is when we've been placed in a particular community. Let's do our background research so that when we're in a community, we actually kind of know who lives there. In fact, this church that we served in New Orleans, they wanted the young couples to come back with the two kids. They wanted to be a church of young families again. We did demographic studies in which we pulled in census records, all of the records. By the way, Canada's wealthy when it comes to census records. You can get the data of who lives near you, in general terms. It wasn't until we had a come to Jesus moment one Sunday night where I presented the demographic information. They wanted the young couples. They wouldn't say it out loud, but they basically wanted folks who looked like them. And I said, we're in a neighborhood now. Nobody looks like us. And those young couples, they don't live here anymore. And the folks who look like us, our neighbors were Guatemalans and Hondurans and African Americans and homosexuals, and we lived in a in fact, the label that the demographers gave us was Bohemian Mix. That's where we lived. We lived in the Bohemian mix among people. And so, but you do need to do that kind of work too, because I think churches can live in a community for years and years, eventually getting disconnected from the community and not know a soul. In fact, one of the things we did as a survey one time is we had college students come and work with us, and we had them three questions. What's the greatest need in this community? If a church was serious about making a difference here, what would they do? And oh, by the way, do you know the Carrollton Avenue Church of Christ? That's the church I was associated with. And we came back with data. The biggest problem is our kids do not have anything to do after school. A church that would make a difference would engage our kids in the community. And no, we don't know who you are, even though we've been there since 1947. So how did we meet the need of our community? We found out that my particular church had retired teachers and some teachers who had recently lost their job because their Christian school went under. So I had a surplus of teachers. The worst performing school in New Orleans was across the street from us. I've got teachers. Worst performing school. Can anybody draw the connection on how this might work? We started a tutoring program in the afternoon. The community was suspicious. We probably had 5 students the first time. Teachers were suspicious of us. But we realized that if we could get to second graders and if we could help them with reading skills, then they do okay on most everything else. Because we had 5th graders, 6th graders having trouble with math. If you don't solve the reading problem by about 2nd grade, you're going to have the math problems, right? Anyway, we started working with these 2nd graders, and we created a tutoring system that required their mothers or parents, their dads if available. Dads weren't in common supply in an urban community. They would help us, and if they had the capacity to tutor, we trained them to tutor. If they didn't have the capacity to tutor, then they helped us make sure the kids were comfortable, that we took care of snack, that we did check-in right. So we tried to place people at the highest level of their ability, and these kids started passing school. By the end of the next year, we had 20 students. By the end of the next year, it was probably 40, I think, 20 to 30. And after 18 years, I know a ton of kids who went to college who would not have gone to college had this church not intervened. That's the kind of difference that I think churches can make. But it's very specific to your context. This is where I don't think one model will fit all. This is where what nonprofit would be the right nonprofit in this neighborhood? Well, obviously, we partnered with another nonprofit that was, it was reading something. They were reading specialists. And so the reading specialists and the church got together, and we found a way to get it to the kids. Is that helpful in seeing how? So you've got to do a couple of things to do good strategy. You've got to know what the gifts are in your community, and you've also got to know what the needs are in the community. And then you begin to let your imagination play and experiment. And if something doesn't work, you say, well, that's not what we're supposed to do. Try something else. So make sure that you're not so broke you can't experiment. When you're in financial trouble, it's hard to experiment. And since I say this all the time, we really don't know what works today. Now, if what works means getting people into church, we really don't know what works today. Oh, we'll get a new priest in, man. Yeah, that's not going to get it done, is it? We'll get a new preacher. Well, that might get it done for a season, but what works today? But having some room to experiment will give you room to say, okay, we tried that didn't work. So I think God will be faithful in the intents of your heart to do good. So okay, I want to give you a really fast, if we were to do a strategic plan, and I think some of you have been through this already, so if this sounds familiar because Bong's put it on you, then so be it. But one of the problems with building a strategic plan is that it takes too much time. So here's a model that you can do it one Saturday morning, and you can basically figure out what to do next. So walk with me. By the way, in the slides, sorry. Wow. All right. Here's the full plan. Let's go a step at a time. Okay, if I had you guys on a Saturday morning, we'd come together, we'd do some introductions. That's the first thing we do. The next thing we would do this works a little bit better with kind of a corporate structure than it does with churches, but even churches can do this. But the top level of your organization is your vision, your mission, and we'll talk about those other pieces. If you don't know what you're doing, you'll probably get there. You hear what I just said? If you don't know what you're doing, you'll probably get there. Nowhere. Having a clear sense of who you are, mission, vision statement will be always part of it, and then we'll go into the. But you're basically working at 3 different levels. One is, here's what we're trying to do. Level two, which is programmatic, is here's some of the things we're going to do to get it done. And then the lower level is operational. Here's the things we actually do. We provide worship service, we provide tutoring, we provide. I had a student a few years ago that was working on, by the way, I need to connect you with this student, so she's back in Calgary, by the way. It's taken me a long time to find her. Esther Chan was working for a nonprofit that did it out of religious reasons, but they basically dug wells to provide fresh water for people in various African countries. Esther was one of the engineers. That was her little part to play in the whole organization. I said, why are you taking this class? She goes, because I want to understand what my bosses are dealing with. I want to understand how the whole thing works. We do this even if we don't think about it, but there is kind of, here's the big thing we're trying to accomplish, right? Here's the program. Here's what here's the programs we're offering. Program's not my favorite word, but anyway, here's the program we're offering, and then here's the day-to-day. But if you don't maintain those things, strategy, remember, is repeating something and getting results. So if you're not giving attention, at least, even if you don't call it this, again, this is not church-friendly language, but you still have to think this way in terms of operational procedures. So if I were to come in and help you guys do a strat plan, one of the first things I would do is give me some history. Tell me how you got here. How did you get to this point? What's your background? What are the things that matter to you? So a lot of this work would be done behind the scenes, but who is it that you think you are? Why do you think you're here? Answering those kind of questions are pretty basic. Is who are we? And this would be true of any nonprofit. Just how did you get to this point? Alberta Bible College celebrated its 90th birthday last year. We're 90 years old. There's a lot of history to tell. We were started in the Depression in 1932 in Lethbridge because there was a need for ministry trained people in the churches in 1932. So I can tell you more history about the institution I serve. And by the way, I was not there in 1932, just letting you know. So we do some history background just to figure out what is your current business model. Again, this is not church-friendly language, but what are you doing right now to get what you're trying to get right now? Your current business model is the practices that you're currently doing in order to get results. Oh, by the way, I get to preach tomorrow, so I get to actually do sermon tomorrow, not presentation on nonprofit. But this is a good question. What are you currently doing? Without embarrassment, this is what we do. Describe it. I would always ask is, are you getting the results you want? So, next. I feel like I might have skipped one or two. Support the life of the church. There's very few churches that believe that today. So churches tend to have rental opportunities if they have a building. They also tend to have other, like if you were able to start an endowment to actually create some interest income. But it's not unusual for churches to need multiple income sources. If you're in another kind of nonprofit, ABC, nonprofit, here's my sources of income. Tuition. About 50% of the money we need to run the college comes from tuition. 10% of my income comes from rentals. We've got an old YMCA that is our building. And so we've got 125 to 150,000, not a big, but that's my rental income. The rest of my income comes from donors, from individuals, and from churches. And then occasionally I get grant money if there's a grant that actually fits. And we also go for the Canadian summer money for putting people to work, young people to work, young students between the age of 15 to 30. Because obviously, if there's certain things you want to do and you can't fund it, you're not going to do it. So one of the things we're going to look at is how much money do we have to work with? And I'm sure every year you guys do you do the budget approval at the AGM? Don't you love AGMs? Okay, I'll just leave that there. Next. This is interesting because churches don't, who's your competition?
Library.
The library is your competition? Yeah, right now, yeah. There's other things to do here. Where do you guys meet?
Church.
Okay. So when I think of competition, I think of those things that draw your people away to other options. So not just other churches, but who's your competition? Are your kids being pulled away by sports? Are your people being attracted to other things just because there's more things to do? I laughed when I was a child. On Sunday nights, you only have really The Wonderful World of Disney. Is anybody old enough to remember The Wonderful World of Disney? Was that even a Filipino thing at all? No? Okay. Well, there was two options: Wonderful World of Disney, which was a program on television, or church. And in order to watch television, I had to be sick. So you had to act like you were sick in order not to go. So those were your two options. Well, today we live in a world where, particularly with these things, these are competition today. And when you're in the nonprofit world, not just church, there's lots of good things to give to. And do you know that I find it harder to raise money for a college, which is a long-term prospect? And I'm not suggesting that, but legitimately, who's the competition? If you move into a community that's a Catholic community, hoping that you can reach people and everybody's Catholic, that's a pretty serious. I shared with you what we did in New Orleans. Wouldn't say that's necessarily yours. What is it that you bring that's unique, that is repeatable, that can get results? While nonprofits do not seek to make money in the same way that a corporate business wants to make money, you still have to make more money than you spend, and you want more money coming in so that you can develop the future. All monies that you raised above what you're spending is going to go into the future of the organization. So we'd explore that. We'd actually spend time trying to write down what is our competitive advantage. Why would somebody want to come to your church or support your nonprofit, Sarah? Why? Yeah. See how that's a good question? Next. Trend analysis is simply trying to figure out, this is where we get to predict the future a little bit. If less and less people are going to church, but more and more people are attending church online, is that something we ought to look into? Not my favorite, but I don't get to set the trends. Just paying attention to what's going on around you is the trends. Are we going to have, by the way, you guys can tell that the economy, nobody's wanting to say the word recession, but it feels like a recession is close. So make some predictions on what needs are going to be here. Money's not going as far as it used to. So we're going to have some people who are hungry. We're going to have some kids that are having challenges getting school supplies. You guys can begin to predict. We're going to have people with transportation problems. You guys want to predict anything else?
Nuclear war.
I think we ought to brace ourselves for that one. Bong went all the way to the top. We're going to nuclear war. No, I think again, I don't get lost in the crazy prophetic stuff like some people, but I do think we're closer to the chance of that third war breaking out. I hope not, but we're certainly closer than we've been in years to anything close to a third world war.
So close.
So some of the things that we can predict, without even reading the book of Revelation, some of the things we can predict is that the economy is going to be hard on people. The poor are going to get poorer. Some of you guys are probably working 2 jobs. Anybody working 2 jobs, or you work the job and the gig? Did I just describe anybody? So you're going to be working the job and the half job and the third of the other job. Am I describing the world you guys already live in? Okay. But again, just being current with what's really going on in our world. One thing that I watch a lot, and it's not because I'm wealthy by any chance, I'm not poor, but I'm not wealthy, but I watch the value of the American dollar versus the loonie because I've got some American interests. And so I'm always watching what's at. Right now the loonie is about 73 cents to the American dollar. So I want American money coming my way. So what are the real trends going on in our culture? If you had to guess, are people reading more or less?
Reading more on devices.
Yeah, they're reading more on devices, and the crazy thing about hypertext is that we learn quickly not to read everything. Back when we read books generally all the way through. Nobody reads hypertext clear through. We read it quickly, and if we see a link that interests us, we jump to another text. So what's happening to attention spans? They generally are getting shorter. Now, which is really funny because at the same time they're getting shorter, podcasts are becoming popular ways of consuming information. And podcasts are not short. So I find there's some contradictory information about what's really happening in the world we live in. Your future business model. This is good. You know what your old business model is, what you're already doing. So your future business model is an attempt to articulate what are you going to do different or next. this is where some creativity is involved, because you're saying, well, we think there's a chance to have a small group system, we're going to do that. We think there's a chance to raise money in this area, so we're going to do that. So you're